There are no bad Star Trek movies on this list. There are 13 Trek movies as of this listing. The bad 3 were left right off. This list features movies from the original crew, the Next Gen crew, and the reboot series. The 3 movies left off this list are pretty bad. Star Trek the motion picture is very, very slow. The acting and dialogue is quite wooden. The story is boring, and it's really long. Star Trek V isn't a horrible movie, it's just really very undercooked. This movie needed more time to develop, or more budget. The concept of an alien pretending to be God for its own purposes is very cool, but it seemed much too rushed. Star Trek Insurrection is the worst of the worst. This movie isn't on this list. It's best forgotten. Number 10. Star Trek Beyond. Star Trek Beyond is a fun, fast, action-packed entry into the Star Trek franchise. The newest lizard alien Krall is looking for an artifact that was lost in space long, long ago. Kirk finds it, and Krall wants it. Krall has some bargaining chips. He has a drone army and a bioweapon. Negotiations can begin. This movie was kind of all over the place, but it's really good at the same time. Krall is somewhat forgettable, but he's still a decent enough villain. He's willing to go to any lengths to get the artifact he's after. He's very ruthless, and he's got a good visual design, but he also feels somewhat generic at the same time. Number 9. Star Trek Generations. The meeting of the 2 captains. Kirk and Picard must stop Sauron, played by Malcolm McDowell. Sauron has kind of lost his mind, and he thinks it may be in this place called the Nexus. He also lost the keys to his ship, so he's stranded on this little planet, and he wants the Nexus to come to him. The Nexus is basically a personal heaven. You can have whatever you desire most in the Nexus. It also turns out that Kirk is in the Nexus. Kirk, having fallen into the Nexus years ago during a mission gone wrong, is living like it's life in the great outdoors. He's a good old boy, chopping wood and riding horses. Picard goes into the Nexus to find Kirk so they can both stop the evil Sauron from redirecting the Nexus ribbon and destroying a whole inhabited world in the process. Kirk says he's tired of retirement and comes with Picard to destroy evil. They succeed, but Kirk falls off a mountain and gets crushed by a bridge, and then crushed by an asteroid. Okay, there was no asteroid. That was an attempt to make his death somewhat epic, because there really wasn't a whole lot of epic there. It's kind of funny, though, the invincible war hero who gets killed because he didn't look both ways before crossing the street. This movie is good, but it isn't great. It's really kind of slow. The meeting of the 2 captains and Malcolm McDowell really kind of elevate this movie. Data goes from amusing to cringy in this film. He uses his emotion chip, and we get an overly wacky performance. The wacky is fine, but it needed to have a better balance with more serious emotions that Data can experience. This movie is really all over the place. Parts of it are pretty good, parts of it are pretty bad, but nothing is extremely either. Number 8. Star Trek Into Darkness. Okay, now we're getting into the really good Star Trek movies. Star Trek Beyond and Generations, we're alright, but everything moving forward is really good to excellent. Star Trek Into Darkness is really good. This is J.J. Abrams' second Star Trek movie, and while not as good as his first, it doesn't really disappoint. This new version of the original crew do work well together. The trinity of Kirk, Spock, and Bones is respected and done well. The secondary characters don't have as much to do here except for Scotty, though. Scotty is played by the delightful Simon Pegg, and it makes sense to give him as much screen time as possible. Benedict Cumberbatch plays the Khan-like villain for this movie, and he does a good job of it. Cumberbatch has some real screen presence, and that shows here. His character, John Harrison, is memorable and brutal. Number 7. Star Trek Nemesis. Star Trek Nemesis is a mixed bag. It's a few-part excellence, and a few parts awful. The story is great, but it wasn't written quite to its potential. Worf is badly mishandled in this movie. He's really more of a punchline. The scene at the wedding where he gets wasted on Romulan ale is notable as his declaring the Romulans fought with honor. Worf has a deep hatred for the Romulans, and he has been known to hold his alcohol better than most. Is Worf becoming soft in his older age? Troi gains superpowers as she uses her limited telepathy to locate the Chancellor across a large distance in space. He was mentally attacking her, so there was a connection, but this goes a little beyond what she has been known to be able to do. It also seemed like Data just wanted to die in this movie, doing things in an unnecessary way that would almost guarantee his destruction. Data sacrifices himself in the end to save the Enterprise, kind of like Spock did in the Wrath of Khan. You can tell they were setting it up so he would be able to come back in the Next Generation movie, which didn't happen, unfortunately. This movie borrows at least a few plot points from the Wrath of Khan. Wrath of Khan was better. This movie is about Skizzen. Skizzen is a clone of Picard who took over the Romulan homeworld. Skizzen needs Picard's blood for living purposes. Instead of asking Picard for some blood and replicating more, he must capture and maybe kill Picard, or enslave him or something like that. The acting is good, and the exchanges between the Next Generation cast is mostly great, except for Worf, who is not written like Worf. Worf sucks in this movie. What's going on here? This movie also has one of the coolest scenes in Next Generation history. The full throttle ship crashing scene where Picard crashes the Enterprise into the Romulan bird of prey is great. If this movie would have been number 8 on the list before that one scene bumped it up a point. This movie had a lot of problems, and I'm bashing it more than higher entries up on this list. I also like this movie more than those movies. The film polarized itself. It was as terrible as it is great. In the end, I really do like this movie despite its problems. Number 6. Star Trek 2009 reboot. Star Trek is the 11th movie in the Trek franchise. It's a reboot that's not a reboot. This takes place in an alternate universe and shows the early days of the original crew. It's about Kirk and his road to becoming the captain of the Enterprise. Kirk is excellently played by Chris Pine. While not exactly like William Shatner's Kirk, it is close enough to be recognizable, and any differences can be explained by it being an alternate universe. The alternate universe explanation is a cheap little plot device that, in this case, really works. I was against the idea of this reboot until I found out about that. I don't want a Star Trek reboot. It doesn't need a reboot. But some story set in an alternate universe, I can dig it. Spock is different in this version. Compared to the original, it's about half as good. But that's still really good. He is more at war with his human emotional side here. He even has a girlfriend, Uhura. Uhura doesn't really stand out much here. She's in this movie too. McCoy, played by Carl Urban, puts on the best performance here. He really nailed it. I feel like I'm watching DeForest Kelly. It's really awesome. Scotty is played by Simon Pegg, and he does a really good job. While this character didn't really feel like the original Scotty, it was still a great performance. Plus, alternate universe. Yay for the workable magic plot device. Chekhov and Sulu are here too. They don't really stand out, but they don't also detract. This movie is really about the original crew interacting with each other, plus action. Lots and lots of action. For dessert, a little romance. And then more action. This movie has a villain. His name is Nero. Nero isn't important. You can forget about him. He's here because the movie needs a villain. It's still a great movie. It's a popcorn action flick. It's not very deep, but it's a lot of fun, and it pays good respect to the original crew. Number 5. Star Trek: The Undiscovered Country. This movie did a lot with its small budget. After the failure of Star Trek V: The Final Frontier, Paramount wasn't so keen on dumping money into the next Star Trek film. Leonard Nimoy had a really good idea for a sixth installment, focusing on the theme of the Cold War and the wall coming down, which was very relevant at the time. This movie starts with the Klingons in disarray. The moon, with their main power facility, Paraxis, exploded and took the home world's ozone layer with it. The Klingons are wounded and are looking for peace with the Federation. Then Kirk and crew get framed for the death of Klingon Counselor Gorkon, and things are looking bad for peace. The Klingons still want peace, so they take Kirk and McCoy as retribution payment. In lieu of war, Kirk and McCoy are sent to the Rura Penthe mines, where they will work until they die. The Klingons still want them dead, so an escape opportunity was set up. When they escape, they would be killed as escapees are killed. Spock locates them and then beams them up. This is the farewell movie for the original cast. Generations had a scene at the beginning, but the full cast wasn't included. As a final film, this was a good one. The story and passion were there, and the cast put on a great performance. Number 4. Star Trek: The Search for Spock. In Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, Spock dies. It was one of the greatest moments in cinema. This is the man's version of a tearjerker ending. The theaters with the tear-stained carpets were common when this movie was released. Then there was a sort of blowback. "How dare you kill Spock?" they cried. The nation was thrown into a deep, dark depression, and only Paramount could make it right. So they released Star Trek III: The Search for Spock. The nation was healed, and all was right again. Spock was back, and everyone was happy. But how would they bring him back? He died in Star Trek II. His body was shot out into space. But it lands on Genesis, a planet of life and rebirth. Spock was reborn and aged rapidly. This was only his body, though, for at the end of Wrath of Khan, Spock was seen touching McCoy's head. Well, he also could have been transferring his Katra or spirit into McCoy, and then the two became one. Most of the movie has McCoy playing Spock. This worked out great for Nimoy. The movie was all about him, and he got to direct it without doing double duty for most of it. Christopher Lloyd plays the villain in this one. Purge is a Klingon commander and wants the power of the Genesis planet and using it as a weapon. Christopher Lloyd did the best anyone could do with Purge. He was a kind of a blandish type villain, and Lloyd should be commended on making him as good as he was. This was a really good movie, but not as great as... Number 3. Star Trek: The Voyage Home. This movie would live or die by the chemistry of the cast. It soared very high. This was one of the great Trek movies. The crew was sent to Earth way back in 1986 to get a humpback whale. That's weird, right? In the correct Starfleet time, a probe has arrived on Earth and has sent a message. When the probe didn't get a response, it started destroying the planet. The probe was talking in humpback whale, and they needed a humpback whale to talk back to avoid all the destruction and burning. This is a smaller movie in most ways than your average Trek movie. It's mostly filmed on location on the streets of San Francisco. This is kind of a comedy, really, as much as a Star Trek movie can be. The crew are all very much fish out of water in this story. Watching them interact with people from the 80s is really very funny. This movie is a true classic. It has a lot of heart, a great story, great writing, great directing from Mr. Spock himself, and great chemistry between the cast, but it's still not as great as number 2, Star Trek First Contact. The 8th movie in this series is pretty much a masterpiece. This movie starred the Next Generation crew in a nice, little cozy time travel story. The big bad of the Trek universe, at this point at least, the Borg, have gone back in time to prevent Earth from first contact, eliminating the Federation before it even begins. Picard and crew simply can't let that happen. They like the Federation, and if it disappeared, they would be unemployed. They follow the Borg back to the past to stop their evil scheme. They arrive way back in the nice, cozy, peaceful year of 2063. They arrived the day before Zefram Cochrane made first contact. Cochrane was played flawlessly by James Cromwell. He's looking for aliens, and he is meant to find the Vulcans, but the Borg want to get there first. That's a first contact nobody wants, and Picard will make sure it doesn't happen. He will even go toe-to-wire with the newly introduced Borg Queen, the central part of the hive mind. This movie does have a great story, great characterization, great acting, great directing, and great everything. This is a perfect Star Trek movie, but there is one that is just a little more perfect. Number 1, Star Trek The Wrath of Khan. This isn't just a perfect Star Trek movie, but a perfect movie altogether. Just slightly better than First Contact. This is a story of revenge. Khan has escaped the planet he was imprisoned on, and he is after Kirk. Kirk, the man who imprisoned him and derailed his ambitions, the man who must pay the ultimate price. Revenge is a dish best served cold. Ricardo Montalban nails it in this masterful performance. The crew of the Enterprise are on top of their game. Even Chekhov gets ample opportunity to shine. Chekhov has always been great, but he's rarely given very much to work with. In this movie, he gets possessed by Vrilterius earworms that turn him into a puppet for Khan to influence. This movie also had the iconic Spock death scene. Of course, that death got reversed in the very next movie, but it is still one of the best ever movie death scenes. The action is top-notch. There's a lot of good old science fiction action here. The writing and directing is some of the best that's ever been done on any franchise ever. The Wrath of Khan is a big shiny jewel that will shine bright for all of eternity.